to CU TV News, where we celebrate and showcase some of the most amazing people around the world who are doing incredible things to make our world a better place. On this episode of CU TV News, elder care advocate, caregiver, and author Pamela Wilson is my special guest. Pamela is the author of the book, The Caregiving Trap. Now, this book is Solutions for Life's Unexpected Changes. In the book, she shares heartfelt advice and her extensive expertise to help people acquire the knowledge and skills needed to navigate the caregiving journey with honesty, respect, and dignity. Pamela has rare experience that lends support to caregivers and aging adults through situations that may seem impossible. Her mother was the family caregiver when she was young. She passed away when Pamela was 35. Her dad passed away when she was 38, and then her brother passed away about a year later. These life-altering experiences caused Pamela to wonder why she didn't become a caregiver. So 20 years ago, she switched careers. And in those 20 years, Pamela has run 2 caregiving organizations in one. She serves as a court-appointed guardian, financial and medical power of attorney, and trustee for hundreds of people, legally responsible for all of their money, medical care, posthumous wishes, and estates. Today, she's using her expertise to provide caregiver education and also support groups to meet what she sees as a growing need in our communities. To learn more about her incredible journey and how she continues to help and inspire others to gain insights into caregiving and replace overwhelm with calm and certainty, Pamela Wilson joins me next on CU TV News. Pamela, welcome to CU TV News. It's a real pleasure to have you with us, and thanks for coming all the way here to the East Coast to join us in the studio for our interview together today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
You are involved in caregiving, and you're so passionate and enthusiastic about it. Early on for you, about 20 years ago or so, you had experiences in your own life that happened that triggered this wondering of whether or not you should be a caregiver and why you weren't a caregiver earlier. But probably when you look at your life, you were always a caregiver. Tell us about those early experiences, things that you dealt with in your own life that got you to wonder about caregiving.
Very early on, my mom was the caregiver of the family. She would take me to go visit grandparents, aunts, uncles, and I loved older people then. And so early on in high school, that was one of my passions. I had a social work scholarship that I didn't take. But back then, junior year of high school, my oldest sister, 29 years old, was killed in a car accident. When I was 35, my mom had been ill quite a bit of her life. She passed away. Several years later, my father, and then my brother. And at that point, I was thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life because of all these changes? And why didn't I help older people years ago?
Right, exactly. So how did you take those first steps to pursue the avenues of becoming a caregiver? I mean, a professional elder care advocate, caregiver, leading to, of course, your book, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But what were some of those first steps that you took that really solidified your becoming a professional in this field?
Me, very logically, I believe it or not, I went back to a college testing site and did a career assessment. And the same things came up. It was crazy, but forest ranger, help older people, social work, and just more helping careers. And so I volunteered with a lady in Marina Del Rey. I came across her through the hospital. She was isolated. She couldn't get out of her apartment. I would go visit her every week, and her name was Billy. And she was the delight of my life. She had a brother who would come visit her once a week, but otherwise, nobody came to see her. And I visited her for about 2 years until she passed away. And that was okay, I like this, I'm gonna do this for a career, I'm gonna leave my corporate life.
Yeah, because you were working in corporate before. Tell us a little about that, some of the things you were doing.
My corporate life, I worked for ConAgra, Best Foods, Unilever, mostly brand management and everything involved in brand management. Right. So product development, working with the sales force, working with the production teams in the sites. So a little bit of everything. It was really good education to start my own business.
So when you decided to, again, formalize the caregiving aspect of things? Did you develop a company? How did you go from there?
So I started with a business plan based on all of my corporate experience. How was I going to do it? Who was I going to advertise to? How was I going to market? And gave notice at my company and started a business in 1999. That business was in-home caregivers for aging adults, which at that time was not very common. Today it's very common.
Sure, you're right. So you were almost on the forefront, really, leading the charge for that type of service that wasn't really prominent at that time. Did you find there was a real need for caregiving and also for an appreciation and understanding of what a caregiver goes through?
There was such a need. It was amazing. But people told me, you're crazy to leave your corporate career. You're going to fail. You know that people fail, right? I'm like, I don't care. I love old people. I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do. And so my first client, my job was to take her golfing. She had Alzheimer's. She couldn't fill out the scorecard anymore, and her family wanted her to go golf on her women's league as she had done all those years before.
Wow, that's amazing. Huh. You know, caregiving really is, it's an amazing thing because we're thinking about the isolation sometimes of the person that needs the care. Mm-hmm. And of course, the person that needs the care is at the forefront. But caregiving itself, I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people who've been in that world, and a lot of times it's a situation where, as you were, you're thrust into it. You didn't necessarily plan to be a caregiver, or you thought you'd be doing any caregiving for family members and loved ones and friends later in life. When you're older, they're older. It doesn't always work that way, right? It's not always chronologically happening.
It's not. When I was younger, because I wasn't married and no kids at the time, I would be the one that would get the phone call. I could almost plan it. Every Sunday night at 6 o'clock, it would be, I don't feel good, please come take me to the hospital. In retrospect, if I was smarter, I would have just went to my parents' home at 2 o'clock on Sunday and stayed the whole evening, right. And I could have probably prevented the hospitalization or done something about it. But it's the phone call at 3 a.m., it's the unexpected heart attack, it's the parent who falls to break the hip, and then all of a sudden, you are thrust into caregiving and you have no idea what to do.
So do you feel that a lot of what you're doing is educating people at any age to be prepared at any moment to possibly becoming a caregiver, and to have the tools and tips and information to be able to get through it in so many different levels, from the resources, but also emotionally getting through now having these life-altering events happen?
Yes, so many family members, so we have the children and then we have the aging adult. One of two things happens. Either the parent wants to talk to the child about caregiving and the child is like, oh no, this is not going to happen. Or the child wants to talk to the parent and the parent says, well, I'm not dying, nothing's happening. So I try to help the conversation to be, talk about it now before something happens rather than in crisis. Because I used to get calls at 5 o'clock on Friday saying, Mom or Dad are being released from the hospital in 2 hours, what do I do? The nursing home's telling me I have to take them home. I have no idea what to do. All these crises happen and people have no idea what to do.
What's the difference between, and is there a difference between being a caregiver and an advocate? Is an advocate, because you're an elder care advocate, but is an advocate taking things one step further? You're actually advocating for the care and proper treatment of that individual and making sure everything is going according to plan and what their wishes are as well?
Yeah, so families would hire me to be the advocate because they didn't have the healthcare expertise, or they had talked to doctors before and didn't get the results they wanted. And because, if you imagine, so most people have 2 sets of parents, doing this in the length of time that I did it, I had thousands of parents and thousands of experiences, so I knew what questions to ask, not to take no for an answer, and families are afraid to do that. So today I help families learn how to advocate and how to stand up for themselves and to get what I call better than average care, because it just doesn't happen.
What are some of the common mistakes that you find most people do without even realizing it when they're thrust into this situation of becoming a caregiver?
Well, so I call it caregiving creep. So adult children will start out at a couple hours a week. And then all of a sudden it's 6 weeks later and they're spending their whole weekends there. What doesn't happen is the conversation about, Mom or Dad, I work, I can come 3 hours during the week, I can come all day on Saturday, I can do these things. But, and this is one of my beliefs, caregiving has to be 50-50. Mom and Dad, what are you going to do to help me? Will you take your medications? Will you bathe? Will you help yourself and help me help you so that this comes out to be a better situation?
How do you deal with the emotional aspects of it too, when sometimes it does become overwhelming? Because a lot of times the person that's becoming the caregiver is putting their own life on hold. Maybe they have, family that they have to tend to as well, and a job and other interests, pursuits, hobbies, loves. So how do they deal with the emotional aspect to really deal with this day to day? Because sometimes, depending on the kind of illness they may be dealing with, like if it's Alzheimer's or something, this could be something that's going to go on for not just a month of rehab. It could go on for years.
The emotional part is difficult, and so caregiving stress, caregiving burnout, results in two types of challenges. There's the emotional part and the physical part. The emotional part, I tell caregivers that they have to find a way to get a break, find some kind of inner strength. So even if it's 30 minutes a day that you're getting away to go for a walk, go to the gym, listen to music, read your prayer book, whatever, you have to find a way to get away, because they get so, it's almost like you can't see the forest through the trees. They're so involved in all these details. I have to cook dinner for Mom and give her medications and do all this. And they never take time away for themselves, and they wonder why they are crying in the bathroom, and they can't sleep nights, and they're stressed, and they don't feel well.
So what are the first things they need to do to be able to cope with that?
Caregiving support, which most of them, so caregivers are selfless. They will do everything for a loved one and nothing for themselves.
Yeah.
They're almost like martyrs. So it's this martyr syndrome that happens in caregiving. They have to recognize that there's support out there, support groups online, in person. Learning more about how to care for a loved one makes the caregiving situation easier, but again, it's time, and they'll say, oh, I don't have time.
Right.
And I say, well, then you have time to be sick, to become more ill. What happens if you can't care for your loved one because you've run yourself into the ground?
Exactly right, which happens often.
A lot.
And now you have two people that are ill that need care. I read a statistic a couple of years back that sometimes the caregiver passes before the person they're caring for. I don't know if it was like a 40% situation, and that sometimes it's even higher when that person is dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's, where the caregiver is actually gone before the person they're treating because of the stress and just everything that's happening. Those are real scary numbers, aren't they?
They are, and a lot of that is spousal caregiving. So especially when you become a spousal caregiver, especially for somebody with dementia, and it's 24/7. You can't leave the house, you're afraid they're going to wander, they're awake all night, you're awake all night with them, but yet they're awake during the day, you're getting no sleep. Those are the loneliest, depressing situations possible, and those spouses become very ill. And even so, let's reverse it. Let's say you're caregiving for a spouse with Alzheimer's, they pass away. 5 years after that, you are more ill, more stressed, getting over all the caregiving years.
So you actually teach people to cope, how to get through these situations and how to deal with them, because at first you were on, really for a number of years when you formed your company, on the front lines. Tell us about some of the incredible things you did. I mean, you were managing people's money. You had sort of this one-stop shop, really providing not only the emotional support but resources and all this knowledge that you have and expertise that you had developed for people who are in need of your service. Tell us about that.
So for over 10 years, I did what's called fiduciary work, and that is court-appointed guardian, medical and financial power of attorney, personal rep of estate, that's when someone dies, and then trustee, and then I was a care manager. So I was like, if you can imagine, a family child caring for a parent, like many parents, hundreds of parents, legally responsible. So I would get the call at 2 in the morning from the nursing home saying, Mary Jo fell. I would get the call saying, do we send this person to the emergency room? I mean, I was on the ground in the emergency room, in nursing homes, in assisted living communities, managing 24-hour in-home care for my clients. I did everything. And it was honestly like a caregiver 24/7. My phone rang all hours of the day. Vacations were interrupted. Dinners, I mean, I remember getting pulled out. I had to leave my husband at a movie theater one time because a client of mine had wandered out of his home, and I got a call from the attorney and the police, and I had to go show up. It's like being a family caregiver. There is no rest, which is why I can help family caregivers, because I know all of the crazy things that happen.
So you also deal with some of the legalese in terms of sometimes when there's caregiving or there's wills involved. You would get involved in some of that because you were making sure that the person that was receiving the care, that their wishes were met even after they've unfortunately passed, right? Tell us a little bit about that involvement and how you've actually helped make sure that that person being cared for, their wishes are actually coming to fruition too.
Many of my clients would have either a power of attorney document that I got named through, or I was appointed through the court. And I would always talk to my clients about, what do you want? One, for your care, so that I can make sure that I'm doing that. But two, after life, where does your money go to? Does it go to your children? Does it go to charities? Who does it go to? Those are important conversations. And over the years, I learned to audio tape and videotape those, because after someone passed away, many times the family would contest the will, and I would end up in a court hearing having to say, yes, Mrs. Smith told me that she wanted these 3 things, and by the way, I have an audio tape.
So would you, when you go back in time and you look at the things that have happened to you in your own life personally with the loss of family, now when you look back all these years later and making this such an important passion and call and mission for your life really, and helping others, do you call upon some of those events sometimes and reflect on them and what you've learned from them and the depth of that when dealing with people who are going through something similar?
I do, because many times people think that I'm young. They're like, oh, you haven't experienced anything. You haven't. And then when I say, well, I lost my mother, I lost my father, I lost my sister, I lost my brother, then they start to open up. There's this wall that they put up when I try to help sometimes. By relating those stories and the mistakes that we made, we thought my mother was going to live forever.
Sure,
I don't know what we were thinking. We had the rose-colored glasses on.
Sure, right. It's a parent, so you figure, right, exactly.
They're going to live forever.
Pamela, do you find any difference in terms of how men and women deal with caregiving, in terms also of how they are able to get the comfort they need to be open to share with it? Because a lot of times, you know, based on personality, people will bottle things up, which just creates more stress and illness and worry and fear. But is there any difference in your years of doing this incredible and impactful work, you've noticed differences between how women handle it and men? And I know that you're very expert at being able to make people feel comfortable, create that safe zone, that non-judgmental, non-threatening, non-critical, especially for the guys who may hold back and say, oh, well, I'm not going to reveal my true feelings, I'm not going to be open about it. But you know how to deal with everybody, regardless of where they're coming from and what their background is, to make them feel safe and comfortable, right? And that's important.
It's very important. Now, as women, we are just, it's stressful, it's crazy, we chit-chat, that's just women.
You turn to each other. Yeah.
Men, on the other hand. So I do a lot of online information. So men will say sometimes something negative like, oh, I hate my mother and I can't stand it and this caregiving is horrible. But when I respond and I say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, what's wrong with your mother? And they start talking back and forth. This one gentleman, his mother had Alzheimer's, she couldn't recognize him. It was horrible. And just from me being able to share my experiences with clients and empathize with him, he opened up about everything. And by the time we were done, I had given him ideas on, well, try this, try that, this may not work, but this may work. There's all kinds of things you can do, and it was just one of the best conversations I've had in a long time with a male caregiver who was stressed.
Now, did that surprise you, that your technique of being naturally just who you are, authentically who you are, you weren't, switching things up, you were being who you really are as Pamela Wilson, the expert. Did it surprise you that he opened up in that way?
I wasn't sure whether he would or not, but I try to bring humor and laughter into caregiving because it is so crazy. And so many times, I'm laughing about things and people are looking at me like, are you crazy? And I'm like, you have to laugh.
Yeah. It's a release.
Yeah, you have to laugh. And so I tried to use a little bit of humor with him and just saying, I know how horrible it is. I've been in a similar situation, and I'm easy to talk to. I don't bite. I'm not going to judge. There's no judgment in caregiving, and a lot of caregivers are afraid of being judged.
Really? So the caregivers would be judged by other family members or other people that they know?
Other family members, outsiders, and believe it, other caregivers. So I've had other caregivers say to a caregiver, "Oh, it's not that bad," and I say, what's your situation like?
Or you're doing it all wrong. You should be doing it this way. Well, they don't know who that mother is or who that person is.
Or walking in, you know what I say? Why don't you go spend 24 hours at that house and then you tell me, oh, it's not that bad.
Walk in my shoes. Exactly.
You'll be like at the end of your wits at 24 hours. Or people on the outside who don't know anything about caregiving, same thing. They're like, oh, can't be that bad.
Exactly.
They have no idea.
So you've gone from that pivotal moment of wondering why you weren't a caregiver, the loss of family, when really you always probably were a caregiver, is naturally who you were, worked in corporate successfully, and then decided to create the company really focused on caregiving, becoming an advocate, helping people from logistics, legal, all of it, to now also morphing into being more of an educational consultant, a reference point. Tell us some of that transition. You're not necessarily doing the day-to-day, because I guess with you doing that, you probably were like an on-call doctor. You were getting calls 24/7 from people who needed advice, help, can you come visit? Tell us about that whole process.
So the 24/7 was endless. It was phone calls in the middle of the night, interruptions all day, but that was my legal responsibility, so I had to do that. Then clients would start coming to me with, believe it or not, their power of attorney paperwork and their living wills and their wills saying, you do this, what is my attorney not telling me? And so I would say, well, you might want to ask about this. Medical errors happen. There's nothing in here to accommodate for medical errors. What happens if you get Alzheimer's? And so then my clients would be, well, don't you have courses? Don't you have this? Don't you have that? And so it was like, oh, I have all these people that I'm responsible for. I can't exactly move over here, so I transitioned out of the day-to-day 24/7 into online courses, education, and support groups.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what are those like? What's a support group like for people who have never been for a support group for caregivers? Are these other caregivers sort of exchanging their stories about how they're dealing with these issues?
There's so many benefits from support group, and especially, and I'm going to go back to the men who are like, I don't need any help. Yeah. Nothing's wrong.
I don't need support. I give support.
Yes,
yeah, right.
It's my job. So one of the first things is people can learn caregiving skills that they may not know. I have learned amazing things from nurses and CNAs over the years about how to do physical caregiving things that I can share with people. The other is just they're so lonely and they're depressed and there's no hope. So hope comes from being in a group with other caregivers who understand, and the caregivers on my online chats, they're so empathetic. They are, they're like, I'm so sorry to hear for you, I'm sending you prayers, I'm thinking about you, don't give up, you can do this. So just that kind of uplift is huge when you're stuck. I mean, let's say you're in a country town, no caregiving support, you're all alone, you're on some farm by yourself taking care of your spouse, but you have the internet.
Right, right.
The internet opens up doors because caregivers can't physically get to support groups. They don't have time, but they can click into the internet and get support and get help and confidence in making decisions because they're afraid of making the wrong decision like we did with my mom.
You mentioned online courses as well. Tell us about some of those resources and how that works.
So one of the most popular subjects is power of attorney. And I talk about power of attorney. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I don't draft the documents, but I was the name on the documents, so I know from A to Z what happens. Power of attorney opens up family conversations because caregiving is a family issue, kind of like I talked about at the beginning. Nobody wants to talk about it. accidents happen, people need power of attorney as early as age 21. It opens up the door to say, Mom or Dad, let's talk about caregiving, because you're probably wondering if I'm going to take care of you. Or the parent saying, kids, let's talk about power of attorney. I need to know if you're going to show up and take care of me. And then it's all the way through, who do you choose, how do you manage financial and medical care plans, all the things that can go wrong that I've been experienced, and then how do you prepare your documents so that you have your wishes written and the person who's your power of attorney does what you want.
Which is important, right? So to follow through is really an important part of this equation too, right?
Mm-hmm. And being as proactive about health as early as possible. So the care plan that I give people is the one that I used in my business. So it's everything from who is your doctor, what medications do you take, and in a sense you're training your power of attorney to know about your health, because that person has to know more about you than anybody else at the time this happens, because they have to be able to advocate.
Right.
I used to fight with doctors about care because they're like, oh, they're 95, they're old, let them die. And I'm like, no, that is not what my client wants.
Yeah, or the family and loved ones around them as well. You have these, and we talked about this, not on camera, but at dinner, these 3 beliefs that you have that are very, very important. Tell us about these 3 beliefs.
The first one is that older adults deserve, and I call it better than average care, because I hate to say it, but the caregiving system is stressed. The healthcare system is stressed. There's not enough staff. They're not trained. People have to learn to advocate for themselves, and families have to learn to advocate for loved ones, because you won't get the care that you expect. And I'll tell a quick story. I had a gentleman who was in an assisted living, and they called me one day and they said, well, you know, Mr. Smith can't get out of bed this morning. We think he needs a wheelchair. And I had seen him the day before and he was fine. And I'm like, why all of a sudden do we need a wheelchair? What's his temperature? Did he sleep last night? What's his blood pressure? You know, has he urinated? They're like, oh, the blood pressure's really high. He's got a high temperature. I'm like, send him to the hospital.
Yeah.
He had pneumonia. They wanted to get a wheelchair and he had pneumonia. Then the doctors in this situation said to me, he's 95, are you sure we want to put him in intensive care and treat him? And I said, yes, he bounces back very quickly. He'll be out of here in 3 or 4 days. And I had to really argue with the doctor to get the doctor to do the treatment, and he did. He bounced back. He lived another 2 years. But a family member might have said, well...
And that's 2 years of living and life with the family.
Yes.
Maybe there was a wedding, maybe there was a baby born, maybe there was an accomplishment. Just, that's scary stuff when you hear that sometimes you're having to fight even the medical community to get somebody to say, oh, well, just because he's 95, just let him
old and disposable. But
go.
A family member may have said, well, okay, doctor, where I knew, because I was the person, I knew what he wanted, and I said, no, this is what we're going to do. And I've been fired by doctors. I fired doctors. When I know more about my client, I don't give up.
Do you ever have to get involved in taking on insurance companies too, because maybe they don't want to pay for that care for that person?
So for example, especially people with dementia who fall or break a hip, the medical community feels like because they have memory loss, they can't rehab or they won't rehab. So it's a battle between time. When someone's in a nursing home, they have so many days to show functional progress. If not, the insurance company boots them. So that's where families have to learn to advocate, and where I can teach families to learn to advocate what to do to show functional progress to get the person to be admitted for another 7 days and another 7 days, because they forget to walk. Because of memory loss, if they're not up and walking, they can't remember how to walk.
So you really are an advocate. I mean, this is exactly what you're talking about, and you're teaching people as well at the same time to learn how to become advocates as well, not only for themselves, but for the people that they're caring for.
Yes, I tell people never to take no for an answer if they have a reason to believe otherwise. So for my clients, they wanted to live, they wanted care, they wanted everything done. I followed that. For the ones that were like, you know, I'm okay, I'm older, I can go on palliative care, I followed that too. But for the people that want to live, you have to fight for them, because the insurance companies, the medical system, the doctors, they're pressed for time, and it's easy for them just to say no. And if you're a family member who won't fight, your loved one will not get the care that they deserve. And older people deserve care, really good care.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everybody does. We all do. You've made it a wonderful list of what caregivers actually need and want. Things like positive family relationships. They don't want all the bickering and all the stress and all of the other chaos that sometimes does develop and happen within families. What are some of the other things that you have learned as a caregiver, as an advocate, as an expert in the field, that caregivers actually need and want?
Well, first is the positive family relationships, as you mentioned. They want good care for their loved ones, which is the big point of the advocacy. It doesn't happen if you don't take the step forward to become more educated, to learn how to advocate. It's not a natural skill that we have, and there's conflict involved. So families don't like conflict within the family. They certainly don't want conflict with doctors and healthcare providers and insurance companies and all of that. And then they want better care for themselves because they are so stressed. And I tell caregivers, look at what you're doing for your parents, look at your parents' health, and learn from it.
Learn from it, right.
Take your parents'
They're very important.
health issues, take them on yourself, and figure out what you can do to prevent that, because otherwise your life may be just like your parent when you're older, and involve your kids. Don't shield your kids from all this caregiving because they will have to care for you.
Right. So whatever, it's never too early to learn, right? To be prepared. And that's, I know we talk a lot about seniors and when people are already at stages of needing care giving and support, but you're also an advocate for sort of training and educating people now at any age to be prepared, because at any moment's notice you can get that phone call that somebody was in an accident or there was a stroke or whatever it may be, and the caregiving happens immediately. You are now a caregiver. Caregiving is also a beautiful thing, isn't it? Not everybody does it. Not everybody steps up to the plate. Some people, some family members and loved ones run away. Oh, I can't handle that. I can't do it. And they go in the opposite direction. So when you are that person who is tasked with and takes it on, it's a blessing, it's a joy, it's a beautiful thing to actually do. You probably remind them of that often too, that what you're doing is really a blessing for the person you're caring for, and in many ways for yourself.
It is, and so caregivers will come to me and they will say, my parents are driving me crazy. And I will ask, what's happening? And in some situations, it's a situation of memory loss. My parents are driving me crazy, and it's like, well, they're not purposely driving you crazy, they can't remember. And what I talk to them about is, fast forward 5 years, your parent's dead. What can that do to you today as far as patience, compassion?
Yeah, right.
Just being more loving and patient with them, because I can tell you, I remember the last time I spoke to my sister, my mother, my father, my brother. I will remember that forever. So if you can fast forward to a situation where you've lost your parent or it's that last conversation, that helps a lot with empathy today and compassion today. And we all forget we're going to be our parents someday. We can only hope that somebody is going to love and take care of us.
Exactly right.
And it's not going to be the opposite. And the other thing that you mentioned, some family caregivers or family members should not be caregivers. If they're not patient, if they don't have empathy, they need to walk away and let the other family members who care be the caregivers, because that's where the conflict comes in.
Do you ever have, oh, I'm sure you do, times when the people who do have the empathy, who are compassionate, who are doing the caregiving, get frustrated because the other ones are not supporting, checking in, lending any support, even financial, whatever it is? Maybe the other person is taking every dime they've got to get that person the medicines or whatever they need. There's got to be a lot of that back and forth sometimes too, which can be rough.
That happens all the time, but sometimes it's self-imposed. So if, let's say, one family member is super efficient, they're organized, they make it look so easy, the other family members are not going to offer to step in until this person asks for help.
Right.
And again, caregivers don't want to ask for help. So I talk about having family meetings where it's, okay, I've been the caregiver, now I need help with groceries and I need help with taking mom to the doctor and someone to pay the bills. Which of you are
Right.
going to help me? And then
Right.
the help comes. But many times it's that one person that does it all because they don't ask for help.
And then sometimes they reach a point of physical and emotional exhaustion and burnout. What then?
And that's worst case. That's why I talk to caregivers. You have to get support early, get help early. Don't get to the point of burnout. At that point, the risk is that they're not going to be able to caregive anymore. So again, it goes to support groups. Sometimes they need professional counseling because it's gone so far. They have to be able to commit to going to the doctor to take care of their health because statistics, caregivers become more ill than the person they are taking care of.
Yeah.
And to your earlier point, sometimes they die first,
Yeah.
which is when you need the caregiving backup plan for what happens when the family caregiver, the parent or the spouse, or one of the children who is the main caregiver dies. Then what is the family going to do?
Exactly. Absolutely. Sometimes people hesitate to ask for help and support too, right? What happens when that's the case?
Well, they do. So examples, they feel like someone will think that they're less of a person if they're asking for help, or that they're not as intelligent, or that they can't do it all. That's not even the point. The point is caregiving should be a family situation when it can be. And so family members will say to me, well, what if I'm the only person and there is no other family? And I say, do you know there's volunteers out there? There are volunteers everywhere that if you ask, you can find them. And this lady last week, she says, well, I'm in a small town of 900 people. And I said, well, watch my video, because I did a video the week before on this. I had a client who lived in a very small rural town in Colorado. I needed people to care for her, and there were no agencies there. I went to churches, and I told the pastor, I said, I need 7 people, male, female, 1 a day to go visit my client. Can you help me? And I found 7 amazing people who did this for 6 months.
Incredible.
They wanted nothing. It was the good deed of helping someone else.
See, I think that's what's amazing about you too. Your clients benefit so greatly. The people that read the book and that take care, and, take advantage of those great resources you have online. You don't give up.
Oh, no.
And you don't give in. Like you said, you went to the church and you went here and you went there. You don't, when there's a roadblock or there's a fork, you go in and you will get over that roadblock. You'll take those roads that lead to success whenever possible. You just don't. Where's that spirit come from?
I think it comes from the fact that my mother taught me to be very positive. So I tend to be more on the positive, not
Dwelling on
at
all the negative.
on the negative.
Right.
And so for me, when I was young, and she said, well, if you want something, go get it. I can't help you with all this. You have to go find a way to get it. And so that was from my teens all the way through my life was, I need this help, and I'm not afraid to ask for help, and I'm not afraid to ask questions. So what if I embarrass myself in front of a doctor? It doesn't matter.
You'd rather have
because
the information.
It's for the
Right.
benefit of my client, and so I just don't give up. There is a way to do everything, and that is partially where this book came from, The Caregiving Trap. Because my clients would tell me, my older clients, I'm so trapped. I'm old, I can't get out of the house, I'm on all these medications, my family has to take care of me. My apartment is a prison, I can't get out. Children, on the other hand, I'm so trapped. I have to be at my parents' house every weekend. This is miserable. I lost all my friends. I'm isolated. It's a trap. And I'm like, come together. There is a solution. Don't give up. And so this book, a lot of this book is practical information about how to work through caregiving, the unexpected part, the costs, memory loss, how to navigate the healthcare system and not take no from medical professionals who very easily say no.
And this book, you were telling me, this has been an 11-year love affair.
Yes.
This has really been, this took you 11 years, but that means something because you could have just thrown a book together and then that was it, like a how-to or something, but you really put a lot of time, attention, and care. Tell us about that experience. And you had told me off camera that people were asking for a book from you. It wasn't even in your game plan to really write a book or be an author in this way. People were saying, we need a book from you. Tell us about that.
So for 11 years, I had started, I write because of my website. There's 500 pages on there full of articles free for caregivers. So I started writing all this, and I was invited by a local station in Denver, 630 KHOW, to do a caregiving program. And I did that over 2.5 years, Sunday mornings, couple hours. And the listeners would say, "Where's the book? Where's the book?" And it took me 20 hours to do a 2-hour show because I wanted to have good guests and good content and make it entertaining and interesting for people. So I gave up the radio show, and the next 6 months, every weekend, I took all the stuff I had from the 10 years before,
Sure, yeah.
and I updated the chapters and wrote the book. And then, as I was telling you before, it went to the editor, and it came back, and it wasn't like even my book. And so I had a pity party for about 3 months, and I rewrote it, and I put everything back in, and this is the book.
And that's the book. So how do you define the book? Let's talk about the book, The Caregiving Trap, Solutions for Life's Unexpected Changes. People asked for the book. They wanted a book from you. So you obliged, and 11 years later, there's the book. But how does this book help people? You've got the online resources. You talk about the support groups. You've got all the expertise. You pick up the phone. What is it about this book that people can find an invaluable resource in so many different categories and different areas that you have found?
Practical, real-life experiences. So I always say you can read a book about how to ride a bicycle, but until you actually do it, it's a whole different thing. This is over 20 years of my life experiences, things that go wrong, things that caregivers should ask for, even things that caregivers don't think to talk about, or to talk about with loved ones, questions to ask, how to get along when families don't get along, advocating memory loss, what happens when someone dies. It's all the real life, honest, frustrating, crazy, joyful, happy things that happen in caregiving.
I like some of the chapters, all of the chapters. Discovery of life in a cardboard box, removing the rose-colored glasses, sticker shock, who really pays. I mean, this is all practical, common sense. The Oreo cookie stuck in the middle. Tell us about that one.
That is when you are an adult and you have children, and you're taking care of them, and then you have your parents over here and maybe grandparents.
Right.
And I call it double, triple duty caregiving. So woman's working, she's taking care of her kids, that's like first, and then we got parents, and then we got taking care of the husband because you're married. Women are, I hate to say it, but they're the most selfless. They will try to do everything possible, and they get run down.
Yeah.
Where the men want to manage caregiving and manage the tasks. So they see it as a project versus women who see it as this whole emotional family connection.
What's the starry-eyed caregiver?
Oh, that is...
Is that different than the rose-colored glasses caregiver?
It is. So rose-colored glasses I equate to my family situation. There were 5 of us kids at the time that my mom was getting sick, and we had this plan. We thought, well, Dad will die first, Mom will move around the country, and she'll live with all of us, and that's what's going to happen. Big surprise, Mom dies first. We're left with Dad, World War II veteran, calls me one night and says, I was in the garage, and I was just not happy. I was going to turn the car on, leave the door down. He goes, and I thought, oh, what if the neighbors find me tomorrow morning dead?
Because of the
That's why
loss
I didn't
of
do
his
it.
wife, his mother.
They had been
your
married
mother,
for
his
50
wife,
years. And so I called my sister, so this is like the denial part, she's a nurse. I called my sister, the nurse, and I said, Dad is seriously depressed. He almost tried to commit suicide. He has a gun in the house. He was a machine gunner in World War II. Get him help. You know what she says to me? What if the neighbors find out that he's depressed? And I said, what if the neighbors find him tomorrow morning in the car dead?
And he's in the obituary.
That would be worse.
Right.
So we got him to the psychiatric hospital. He went on depression medications. Wonderful life the next 3 years. He traveled. He went back to Pearl Harbor, Alaskan cruise. I mean, had a wonderful life for 3 years after we got him help. And many older adults are depressed. Many caregivers are depressed. It's the stigma of, I don't want to admit that I'm depressed and take pills. It made his life, he was a different person.
It sounds like so much common sense that sometimes you have to almost go to certain people and go, wake up. this is common sense. This is for the
But it's
benefit of our
not.
loved one, but they don't.
When you are a caregiver, you are so overwhelmed by everything.
Yeah.
You see this cup of coffee and all this disaster is happening
Yeah, around
here,
you.
and you can't see everything else until somebody says to you,
Right.
wake up, pay attention.
Right. Or for the other family members, you may be the caregiver, but the other ones who are saying, let's, we'll worry about what the neighbors think. You have to sort of slap them around and say, look, what are we talking about? It's all common sense. One of the things that you're leading to here is also the self-preservation.
Yes.
You have a chapter on that, which I'm sure is one people read and reread often. Tell us a little about self-preservation. How to manage that.
Self-preservation is, caregiving is crazy. Okay, I don't care if people say, oh, it's not that difficult. I'm like, no, it's crazy, it's catastrophic, it's chaos, it's crazy. If it's not crazy yet, wait 2 weeks and then call me.
It'll get crazy.
So it's the self-preservation of, I have all these things to do. How am I going to balance work, caregiving for children, a husband, my parents, and then the self-preservation of the mental part. So some parents, some older adults, they may have dementia and a mental illness. And those are the hardest situations to caregive in. How do you preserve your sanity in those kinds of situations? You have to find some help, whether it's a volunteer, respite care comes in and you get a break for 4 hours a week, because if you don't preserve yourself, you will not be that caregiver, and then who is going to take care of that person?
Right. And there are studies that are saying there's a tremendous increase in Alzheimer's and dementia. So we really need to be ready.
Well, and noticing the little signs. So children will call me and say, well, how do I know if mom or dad has memory loss? Statistics now show 10 to 20 years before cardiovascular issues start. That goes into vascular dementia. So the first sign of somebody having dementia is poor money management. I would have clients who would bounce checks or write checks, 20 checks to a charity in a day because they felt sorry for the charities, and then they can't buy groceries. They can't pay their bills. So that's the first sign. And then you go to your parents' house and you have notes and mail stacked up all over the place. They're not bathing, all these signs. But yet people don't see that as, this is memory loss, this is dementia. You have to go to the doctor to get the diagnosis.
You also have a chapter in here about really meeting the unexpected. Tell us about that.
The unexpected is all these crazy things that you don't think are going to happen. And so I'll give you an example. Caregiver is coming in to take care of dad. Now, there are really good caregivers out there, wonderful caregivers. There are also caregivers who have not so good intentions. What happens when dad becomes interested in this 25-year-old caregiver and wants to marry her? These are the real situations out there that happen that you don't expect. Or I had a person in an assisted living community and she was allergic to chocolate. There's this thing called patient rights. My client would ask for chocolate, the caregivers would be like, oh yes, here's a piece of chocolate. She would end up in the emergency room 5 times in 1 month. The hospital is calling me saying, what are you doing? Why are you giving her chocolate? And it's like, it's not me.
Right.
I had to get the ombudsman involved. I had to get Adult Protective Services involved to train these caregivers to say, yes, it's a patient right, but she's diabetic. It's a $1,500 trip to the emergency room every time. You have to say no.
A lot to think about.
It goes back to the advocacy of the family, not realizing when you have more people involved, more opinions, more things go wrong, it gets crazy.
I would imagine too there's also a conversation that often comes to the forefront, which is, does that person that you're going to be caring for stay home or go to a facility? Tell us about what that's like.
Preference is always home. Nobody wants to go to a nursing home or a care facility if they don't have to. But I talk to older adults about, this is your work after retirement. Your work is, you must pay attention to your nutrition. You must walk, because when you can't walk or you can't do this off of a chair and you can't get out of bed, you can't stay home. And there's my falls fractures death speech. So hip fractures, many times adults can't return home. People living in the community, 13% die within a year, 22% if they're in assisted living communities, 30% in skilled nursing or dementia. Hip fractures are tragic, and all it takes is just one little turn this way and you're done. So walk at the grocery store, walk around the block, do arm exercises. The more physically active you are, the more likely you are able to stay home. And then again, you have to pay attention to nutrition and hygiene and all those things.
You've literally worked and helped with thousands of people from all walks of life, right? I mean,
Yes.
This has got to be, when you look at it all in its total accumulation of experiences, the accumulation of all these different people you've met and the different scenarios, it's got to be very fulfilling and satisfying for you knowing you're doing your life's work.
That's why I do it. I get such a reward out of an older person saying, thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking the time. I was in this year, Valentine's Day, 2018, in the emergency room with a client. And we were watching MASH on television to distract her from everything that was going on. And she's like, she held my hand. She's like, honey, thank you so much for being here with me. I know it's Valentine's Day. You probably would rather be somewhere else. I'm like, no, I can't imagine being anywhere else but with you. The reward that I get personally from doing this is what makes me not take no for an answer. What makes me tell people don't give up. There's always a solution. No matter what it is, there's always something that can be done.
What's the feedback you get? Now, that's a wonderful example of feedback. What are some of the success stories you've had, some other ones that you can share with us?
You know, I've had clients who would have certain types of medical conditions. And again, the family may have wanted to give up, or the doctor would say, oh, they're old. And the client would say, I want to be treated. What can we do? Specialists are significant. So family members many times will just go to a general practitioner. The specialists out there, cardiologists, urologists, pulmonologists, they can do miracles. I had a client who had a certain type of lung cancer that was highly treatable. Her primary care doctor put her on hospice, let her die. The doctor at the assisted living community, oh, that's not going to work. The oncologist, high percentage rate, high success. She went on the treatment and she lived a number of months longer than she would have, got to make peace with her family. Her family were there when she passed away. So it's just, I call it make a wish. Yeah. What is your wish for life? If I can make it happen, I will. Whether it's you get to watch Broncos every Sunday, or you get a beer every now and then, or you get to go to a game because I have a caregiver take you to a game. It's make a wish for these older people who have not a lot to live for sometimes in their opinion.
Every moment of life is precious and it's a gift given. What happens when you have situations where, due to health deterioration, disease, illness, there is that determination that there's nothing really that can be done medically, and maybe there's a life support, they're going on to life support or on it, those types of things that can really be very heady topics and very, moving and emotional for family members.
So I'll tell you a story on that one. One year at Christmas, I get a call from a hospital in Denver saying, we have this man, he's 57. He has no family, he has no money, we can't get him out of the hospital, we need a volunteer guardian. We've asked everyone else and they have turned us down. And of course me, it's the holidays. I'm thinking, okay, I'll do it. But I needed to go see him first. This poor man was a parking garage attendant. He had a stroke in a parking garage, quadriplegic, feeding tube, breathing tube, everything. And I said, yes, I will do this. Got him to a nursing home because he really needed full-time care, and over time he started to have pneumonia. He was on a feeding tube, he aspirated, and the doctors came to me and they said, Pamela, this can't continue. It's not quality of life for him. It's time to make that decision. And so I had to think about it for 3 days because I, like family members, my first thought was, if I take the feeding tube away, I'm ending his life. And I felt really bad, okay? Right. But I went and I talked to him about it, and he's like, this is bad. I go to the hospital every week, I can't breathe, I'm choking to death. And so took the feeding tube away, he passed away, and it was a really positive thing, as sad as it was, but I felt horrible for a while because I thought, here, I'm taking a life, and life is precious, and you don't just take a life like that. No. You have to really think about it. So that's the hard part of what I do, and that's why sometimes family members don't want to appoint their children as power of attorney, because as power of attorney, you have to make that decision. You're the one turning the machine off, pulling the plug, stopping the life support, and it's heartbreaking.
What would you say to somebody who may be watching this on CUTV News right now, who is about to or is currently going through some of these scenarios we outlined as now a caregiver, and they're struggling, and there's financial issues, there's physical, emotional stresses, and they're dealing with a lot right now, and they don't know where to turn. What advice could you give them now during this interview, just to get that one foot in front of the other and seek that help?
Take a step. So my website, PamelaDWilson.com, lots of free information, no obligation. I have a library with 30 categories, over 500 articles on all the things we just talked about. I do a free monthly caregiving support group online. It's live, a webinar, first Saturday of every month. I do Facebook videos every day, and I have a support group on Facebook that people can sign into. It's called The Caregiving Trap. It's the name of the book. It doesn't cost you a thing. You have to start somewhere in finding help and finding information and finding support. And then after that, if you want to take a course and pay me, fine. But there's so much free information, but you've got to take the step to ask for help, and that's the hardest thing for a caregiver to do, is to admit that they need help.
So bottom line is, if they connect with you, all the resources are there. Like you said, the online courses, support groups, of course, this amazing book, The Caregiving Trap. And that's really what it is. I mean, the name is so perfect because it can be a trap for many people, right?
It can be. And it was funny, when I was coming up with the name, some people said, oh, that's so negative. And I said, are you a caregiver? And they said, well, no. And I said, well, then 20 years from now, when you're a caregiver,
you'll be
you
in those
think about it,
shoes and you'll understand and relate.
Yeah, you'll be able to empathize with other people, because some people can't empathize.
Well, you certainly do, and you've done it for thousands of people and continue to do it. And Pamela, this was really an honor and a pleasure to have you. And thank you for all the beautiful work you're doing, coming out of the result of your own experiences personally in your family, where you could have chosen to go the other direction and hide under a rock. But you saw that as a beautiful opportunity to inspire others, and it really is a blessing. Caregiving is not easy. It's not something we always plan to do. But when it's done right and when it's done for the right reasons, it can be a very beautiful life lesson. And you're going to be helping somebody that you love and that you care for and that you want to give the best to, that may, for many years, given you their best. And it's huge, right? It's deep and it's personal too.
And that's what the caregivers say to me. They're like, my mom changed my diaper.
Right.
How can I not do this? But then I'm falling apart.
Exactly right. Well, thanks for joining us on CUTV News. It was a real pleasure and honor meeting you, and wish you continued success and everything that you do, inspiring so many others.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to learn more, you can go to the website, PamelaDWilson.com. Again, the name of the book is The Caregiving Trap. It's solutions for life's unexpected changes, the challenges that happen. Also, she's got online courses, she's got support group information. It's a bevy of resource, and we thank Pamela Wilson for joining us here on CUTV News. We thank you for joining us as well. For the entire team, I'm Jim Masters. We'll see you again soon.